Shut up and sit down.
You want to talk about some HR bullshit?
Yeah, let's get the intro going.
Right.
Oh, hey, I'm Terra Walker, and that's Ted Bauer, and today we're talking about...
Today we're going to talk about some foibles of human resources, and to avoid it being a complete bitch fest, we'll also propose some potential solutions to it, but we are probably going to start out doing some bitching about the functionality of it, if that's, hopefully that's acceptable to some people that end up viewing this.
Well, today, okay, so this has come up quite a bit, and especially today, our conversations on Twitter, but also on Facebook, I've had several people like massively bitching about HR being involved in hiring processes that they're not supposed to be involved in, and people losing jobs because HR is involved where they're not supposed to be involved. And
Yep.
so I gave them heads up, hey, we're doing the show about that tonight, which this will be the following week from all of these conversations. But you know, like, this is a big deal. Like, HR is not in it for the employees, and
Yep.
people make the mistake of thinking so. And so they put an awful lot of trust in a human resources department that gives zero craps about them and huge, big craps about marks on CEOs and the big guys. So
Yeah. So I used to tell my friends, I feel like you can't really, and I think we talked about this in like the second episode we did, but I used to tell my friends, like, you can't really be an adult until you realize that your parents have flaws. Like, for some people that happens at age 3, and that's really sad, but for some people it doesn't happen until they're like 40.
right, which is equally sad.
Right, that's equally sad on the other side of the spectrum. Everybody needs to realize that at some point, and that's when I think your passageway to adulthood begins. I would say it's the same thing in professional context, is like the number one thing you need to understand what work is in a company setting. And it's different if you're like it's not even that different if you're a teacher, because it's the same type of a setup. Right. But like, basically HR is not out for you. They might claim that when they're onboarding you, they might claim that in the interview process. They are out for the top of the company and like the overall compliance, legal environment of the company, along with whoever does in-house. So the average employee is not protected in that regard. And I guess the argument 35 years ago would have been, oh, well, unions are supposed to protect that. But now I think we're under 12% of any type of worker is in the union. So I don't think that's the answer anymore. The other thing I would say that I've always thought of or heard from people about the HR side of it is, it makes no logical sense that the same department that hires you is also the one that shepherds along your firing. And it makes no sense that the same department that can fire you is supposed to be responsible for your engagement in work. So like, those two things make no sense. And then I guess the final thing that I think makes no sense, and there's a lot, like I could probably go on about HR forever, but like the final thing to me that makes no sense is like, it doesn't face revenue. It should face revenue because theoretically it has all this data on people and how productive they are and how they're performing and etc. But like, because it's not usually set up to face revenue, executive level people don't care about it. So then any initiative that comes out of there, they subsequently don't care about. Oh, and then lo and behold, we put diversity in there. So it's like, you wonder why all these companies are terrible with like female ratios, minority ratios, because diversity is usually an HR initiative, but HR isn't tied to money, and the people that can actually make decisions care about money. So that's kind of like the flaw of how the whole thing is structured.
And that's if HR is actually keeping stats, because chances are they're not actually keeping stats. Chances are they willy-nilly it and guess, and when they need the info, call the hiring managers.
Yep. So
Say, how diverse are your teams? Because we've got EEOC compliance we have to meet.
right.
And
So
those managers are clueless too. So
yep. So I was in a graduate program for like org development, like 2012 to 2014. And we had 3 stats-driven classes. So one was compensation, one was like general statistical analysis, and I forget the third one. It was more like an MBA style class, which was beneficial. But when you talk to people in org dev who like really wanted to go into HR specifically,
is your dog playing with the squeaky toy right now?
Yeah, in the background. Well, it's like 2 rooms over. He's still doing it though. I was actually like, not to get far afield on this because I will go back to statistics in a second, but I was actually worried about him like an hour ago because he wasn't pooping. So I was like hoping that he wasn't ill or whatever. And now the squeaky toy thing gives me hope that maybe he's like back to being happy, you know.
Seems that way. Anyway, back to our.
What I was gonna say is like all the org dev people that wanted to go into HR, that was their preferred career. They were like, I would say, let's say there were 70 people that want to go into HR through this program. It was about 70. There were like 3 to 5 of them that were good at anything statistical, and the rest of them were lost. And if you think about it, it's kind of logical because if you want to go into HR, your brain is either people focused or like compliance focused. Maybe compliance is a little bit statistical in terms of how you think stuff through, but like none of these people are data scientists. And like the problem with like telling a data scientist like you got to work on HR related stuff is that's probably a highly compensated person in the modern age, and they're going to think that's like a demotion or a step down. So you're right, is what happens is like all the time you get like, shit, we really need like data out of these HR departments and centers, but like they're winging it. And then they're calling hiring managers who may not know what the data is either.
Right.
And like the guys that are actually paid to analyze the data are probably analyzing like business expansion, like merger efforts. So like all this stuff about people that could theoretically empower HR, like no one's really analyzing it.
Right. And there's no and again, we go back to there's no accurate data, and the name of the department is misleading.
Yep, 100%.
It's misleading. Human resources should be a data-driven department just by default. We need to know what those resources are. What's our demographics? Who's got what education? Who's got what background? Who's got what skills? Who's ready to learn those skills that they need? We need that kind of data. That should all be data. There needs to be another department that handles the soft science of dealing with human nature and human involvement in a corporation.
I would agree with that. And I would say like, it almost should be, okay, we can get into some solutions now, but I'll bitch about one thing first, is that Josh McCormick is on one of our Twitter threads, like one thing he said one time that, you know, I think he goes up and down on different stuff. Like I agree with some stuff. I don't agree with everything, but one thing he said that I thought was smart was that both words of the equation are misleading because it's not really that human. Like we're not treated like humans all the time by it. And most leadership teams are trying to automate it out, you know, like give it to a software suite. So it's not really human. And like, if it was resources driven, there would be data on it. Like if it's insulting enough to call us resources, then there should at least be more intel on what we're doing. You know? So like both words of it are wrong. Okay, so one thing I would say to piggyback off what you were saying is like I think it should be completely split into 2 or 3 parts where like there should be a data center that analyzes all the stuff about people, demographics, diversity, performance reviews, which is another topic I'm sure we'll cover because it's kind of a relic. But like they analyze all the data related to people and like, okay, maybe those are well-compensated data scientists and they also get to work on other stuff. But like there needs to be a data center that is within HR or falls around people data. So there's that. Then there should almost be like a mix of HR and marketing that deals with like how are we presenting our brand outward? Like, do people want to work here? Are people shitting on us on Glassdoor all the time? Like, how
Right.
are we like? How are we dealing with like the fluffier, like softer elements of people, right?
Yeah.
And then I almost think there should almost be like an entire division of HR, which maybe it's only 3 or 4 people, but like at a mid-sized company, there should be an entire division that just thinks about onboarding and like walking through that process. But I don't mean just the first week. I mean up to like a year,
Yeah.
because
There needs to be people that follow employees through that.
yeah,
Absolutely.
because if your turnover is almost entirely related to the first 6 months that a person is there. Like,
Yes.
they may end up being there 3 years because they couldn't find anything and they want to keep getting a paycheck. But like, they're gonna decide in the first 6 months, like, this place is not for me. And so you need 1 to 4 people that are like dedicated to like everything related to the first year and different experiences they can have. That almost needs to be an entire subdivision,
Yep.
because what happens is, and I guess I would put like recruiting and hiring in that middle, like soft skills bucket, because
Yep.
I would love to see us hire for soft skills more. And then I would say, kind of tangential to that, I think I've always thought this, and like people look at me like I'm speaking Chinese when I say it, but like I think recruiting, maybe you hire them through HR. I think recruiting should be classified as a business development function and not
Yes.
an HR function. Because if it's classified as HR, nobody with power is going to care. But if it's classified as business development, people are like, oh, I need to think about this, you know?
Well, and
So,
then it suddenly becomes important that your human resources are living up to their potential, be
right,
willing to upgrade their potential, and loving to come to work on time and ready to go every single day.
right. Because also, until we start doing more around automation, like, you still need good people for your business to be productive, whether you're a mom and pop store or you're like a big company. So getting those people should be viewed as a business development activity, because you're developing your business by getting good people.
Right.
It shouldn't be viewed as a HR activity, because someone hears that that's higher up and thinks like compliance, you know, or like, that's a department where I cover my ass, or that's where I throw diversity projects to, or whatever. And like, man, I met with a guy that owns a big marketing agency. They do pretty good revenue once.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it was probably year 3 of his agency where he added like a HR function. And like, okay, this is before all the Me Too stuff started, which obviously should have started earlier than it really did. But
Oh
like,
yeah, right.
this is before all that came into the mainstream. And he like straight up told me, he's like, the only thing I want from HR is like a place to cover my ass, and I want to put like hot women in it. And that's it. And I was like, okay. Like, he came out and said it, but it's like, how many people do you think that way? It's probably more than we want to admit.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And they seem to use, back to the recruiting and HR, they seem to use HR for recruiting
Right.
and hire those women on purpose for that.
Yeah.
And
100%.
and then don't like when the results that when they hire
Like, people that are just eye candy, essentially.
yes.
So, yeah, I mean, I would say those are two of the biggest things for me. Like, I know leadership teams are going to continue to try to automate the HR function. Like, a big thing that you see in like recruitment, thought leadership these days is like, oh, get chat bots, because then you'll communicate better with candidates. That can work, and for big companies, I think it's not a bad idea. But like, I don't think chatbots are there with language yet. If you're using chatbots just for like FAQs, and you program all these FAQs into it, and then a candidate says like, where does my application stand? And they can answer that. That's great. It doesn't replace like one-to-one human communication, like
Right.
getting an email or a phone call from the recruiter. But like, I know that people will increasingly look for those types of options, but I would say, first of all, like, what I just said, I would move the recruiting side of it to business development or tie it to business development somehow, and then break HR into parts, because the worst shit that you can have happen in HR is like somebody that should be focused on onboarding, who would be good at that, suddenly gets pulled over here to some like Chinese fire drill about like compliance or like performance improvement plan or whatever, because now the onboarding for like the people starting the next Monday is going to suck because this person's like so focused on this fire drill. So I feel like you need to break it into parts, and too many people approach HR as like, okay, like y'all try to master these 20 things. And it's like, okay, well then what happens when like all 20 are done shittily as opposed to like 3 things being done well, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, I think we're going to have to go into that just kind of in general even more, because that reaches back to mediocrity and hanging with status quo and being okay with not excelling and just kind of hanging out and having a general malaise about your position in a company.
Yep, for sure. And that's the other thing. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No. That's really where I was going with it, is that just really falls into, and yet another reason why human resources should be data gathering, and there needs to be a soft science department to hold employee hands. What if you have an employee that's not quite getting it?
Right.
What they do is they fire them, Ted.
Yep.
Instead of finding some place for that employee to exist inside the company, they just fire them. And I don't believe, and there are some instances that this is not true, but I don't believe that a company can't find some better way to utilize an employee that they're about to fire because of something like that. There are obviously really great reasons to fire people, but being really half-assed is not a good reason.
I wrote a thing back in like, I guess October 2016 about like how I think there's no such thing as a bad employee. So like I've been lucky enough to actually have 2 people that I worked with at 2 different jobs, and the jobs were entirely different, like different industries, whatever. And like in each case, the person was terrible at one of the jobs and pretty good at the other one of the jobs. And it's like, that to me just shows that like, okay, the difference is like, it literally could have just been the manager, the relationship with the team, the relationship to like what was happening in the second industry or whatever. And like, we never think about that. And I think because HR people like tend to have this compliance type brain, like if you're classifying like reptile brain or whatever, they tend to have a compliance type brain. And it's like they can't think outside the, I hate that expression, but like they can't think outside the box, about like, okay, this person's not good in this department or on this team, but like maybe they could be really valuable somewhere else,
Which is why
problem.
that's just I see people, I see that department, those kinds of departments being headed up by I hate the general buzzword soft sciences, because that just is such a general thing. I'm thinking more along the lines of like psychology majors and counselors and people who are invested in the human condition, who get the different types of communications, or can just see that someone's just not quite cutting it. So maybe if we make a minor adjustment in their duties and hand something else off to somebody else, or hire another person to be in that role. Yep. We really need people, because turnover rates are horrendous. And now, especially when people can afford, because we have the lowest jobless rate that the country's had in quite a while. Yep. And so companies are just kicking people out and spending it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to onboard employees and then kick them out. And it's just, it seems inefficient.
Yeah, horribly inefficient. And like that's the thing too, is that you see a lot of times startups come about because they're tied to some type of market inefficiency. And we have probably more HR tech companies than we've had in like probably human history right now.
Right.
Like, since the rise of the internet as a whole.
Yeah.
And it's because everybody sees this damn market inefficiency out there and they're trying to solve the problem, which is noble, but they're not solving it the right way because they're removing like human context and connection from the process and trying to do it through a platform, which is like
Right there. That's it.
yeah. And that's like making candidates. Okay, so on the recruiting side, explicitly, that's making candidates pissed off because they're not getting answers they want from human beings.
Right.
But then even on the employee side, the part of HR touches that is like, dude, I've told this story before. I don't think I've told it on here, but like the last full-time job I had a performance review in September, like total chicken shit move. It was like the Friday before Labor Day at like 2 p.m. So like everybody was checked out. Like my boss didn't even want to be there. It was such a bullshit situation. And I remember exactly because like me and the girl I was married to then and like a couple of our friends went out after that. And like one of my friends at the time, I mean, I'm still friends with him, but he was like this 51-year-old financial services dude. I was probably 34 at the time. And like my manager had given me this piece of paper and like we're out drinking on a Friday night after I got this performance review and he read like her side of it and he just tore it up in front of me at the bar and was like, this is such bullshit. Like, and it was like a generally positive review. I think I got like a 7 on a 1 to 10 or something. But like, this is the part that always boggled my mind. This was in September. She brought up something that I did in January, had never mentioned it since January, brought it up on that review and like docked me for it. So here I am like in this review thinking to myself like, and I'm sure we'll do a separate episode about reviews at some point, but like, here I am and I'm like, man, if I stepped outside of this office right now, I could order a car or like a pizza on my phone and it would be acknowledged in like 3 minutes. But I have to wait 9 months for the person I report to tell me this story. And I was just like, I thought it was so ridiculous. But like, that's the problem. That's part of the problem with HR for me is like, so much of like the HR technology side of it is people selling these platforms so that like managers think like I can hide behind this platform instead of like in January I saw something I didn't like. Maybe I'll go have a conversation with him.
Which is what they should be doing.
Right. She probably put that in some platform. Like maybe I did notice it or maybe I clicked some button on it at the time.
It's a sticky note in her little folder for you somehow.
But it never like came up as a big deal. And then suddenly like 9 months later, it's like takes up 15 minutes of an hour performance review. So I'm just
Which is also bullshit. Why do you need an hour-long performance review?
Right. Why can't that just be happening as a series of 5-minute conversations?
And it should be. Yeah.
Right. So like basically HR isn't empowering that side of the coin where like people are doing this and talking about stuff and like bouncing ideas off each other. So that's like part of the flaw to me. And the only way I feel like that part can be solved is like you got to break it up and or move it to a context where like someone with actual authority is going to be like, oh, I get it. I know why I need to care about that, you know? And then like, I always wondered this too, since we were talking about data before, I have never in any place I've worked or like freelance for, I've never seen anybody have data about turnover by manager, turnover by department, turnover by like hire date.
Like, there's things that need to be tracked.
Yeah, people need to know that because like I don't care. Okay, the math on it is like this. If somebody is really good at making their numbers, so let's say they generate you like $2 million in a quarter, just to use an easy number.
Right.
But like if 10 of their direct reports leave in the same fucking quarter, that's more than $2 million, like in terms of all the resources you need to fill those jobs. So like you think that they're a superstar because of the revenue part, they're actually losing you money. So like more people need to track that because man, I worked with this dude. I won't use names on this thing, obviously, but like I worked with this dude, and he would always have good quarters from the stuff that was tracked, but like he would lose 15 people a quarter on a 20-person team. So
Yep.
the HR side was always scrambling to figure his shit out. And it's like, when you look at like, I think that job qualified for overtime too. When you're looking at their overtime, plus like how it's taken away from other stuff, all the recruiting costs associated with it, I bet this dude was losing the company money over the year, you know?
Probably
But
easily.
all we look at is the incoming money. We don't think about that other stuff. So it's like, oh man, this dude's actually a loss for us, but we're not thinking like that. So that's all a long way of saying like we need better data on the HR side, you know?
Well, yes, and I've watched several companies. Like I worked for big oil and big telecom and big mining, and I've watched companies have high turnover rates, and the managers that's a manager. Like if your manager is continually needing new people because they're leaving for whatever reason, they're being fired or they're quitting. It doesn't matter. There's a problem there, and maybe your manager is the problem, and you need to like figure out what the problem. You need to have them audited. They need to have a for lack of a better term, I don't know what the hell I'm saying now, lack of a better term, a come to Jesus conversation.
Yep.
You know, like why is your team leaving? Like that's something somebody needs to freaking notice.
Yep.
Because I would call them in my office and be like, you need to tell me right now why your team is leaving. Why are you firing them? Why are they quitting? Either way, you don't have a team, and I consistently have to spend so much money to give you a team that you are running away somehow. What is your problem? Because you can't hack it. You're the problem in this scenario.
100%.
I'm going to have to get rid of you if you can't fix it.
Right. And then I guess the other elephant in this room is like people have been talking about this idea of people analytics for years. So like basically take a profile of your ideal employee, plug that as an algorithm into your hiring processes, and like get more of your ideal employee. I don't think that's a terrible idea. It's like certainly better than a lot of how we do hiring now. The only problem with it is your ideal employee is going to be a specific type of person, and you're going to create a culture of sameness instead of one that has like differing opinions. And that's a problem because like you're going to fall into every bias hole possible. So I
Your
see
ideal employee needs to be, and we see this time and again, and this is proven with people like, again, Warren Buffett,
right.
Elon Musk, Richard Branson. You need to be hiring people smarter than you, that get your divisions better than you do, that you can count on because you've paid them well to give you the correct information to make the informed decisions to move your business up.
Yep, for sure. I would agree totally.
It only makes sense that I, as an event planner and public relations person, hire people that write PR releases better than me.
Yep.
It only makes sense that somebody can budget better than me, that I hire somebody to help me out that can budget better than I can budget.
Yep. I mean, that's the whole principle of outsourcing if you think about it, you know?
Right.
Why are you keeping stuff in-house that you know you could do better out of house? You know? Like, it makes perfect sense to me, but again, like, I think we've had enough discussions about how illogical a lot of this shit ends up being anyway.
Right.
So my big concern with people analytics though is just like sameness. Is like if you have a culture where everyone's exactly the same, like you're not really going to develop anything in that way, you know?
Well, and then we're back to where we're at now, where we have unhappy employees with no diversity because we all are trying to fit into this little tiny box that someone has set out for us. And so we don't want to come to work after 90 days or 6 months, but we are because it's a steady paycheck and we'll stick around until something better comes along.
Right, for sure.
Or we grow the cojones to get up and walk away and do our own thing.
Right. And basically, like, a lot of people think those are the only two options, and they're not, although they are probably the two biggest buckets. But, like, the easiest way around that problem would simply be to like figure out ways to make workplaces better. But then again, now we're back to the core issue of this episode, which is like, how are you gonna, if you're gonna root people stuff, people processes in this department that seemingly no one really cares about, you're not necessarily gonna make it better that way. So that's like why I feel like what we've been saying, whereby you break it up or tie the people acquisition side to business development, makes a lot of sense, because then at least like some people might actually care about it or care about it more.
Right. Because again, suddenly they're tracking the at the very least, they're tracking the monetary cost of gaining and losing employees as
Yep.
part of a business development plan.
Which is huge. And then one other thing that someone told me once that I thought was a good idea is like, this is another episode we need to have, is just the whole deal with vocabulary at work. It's like so different across levels, because a rank and file person, a middle person, and a high level person use such different terms to describe stuff, right?
Yep.
So one thing someone told me once that I thought was a good idea, I think I heard this at like a career builder trade show deal, is like, okay, if you go to an executive, let's say you move recruiting to business development. If you go to an executive and only talk in recruiting words, he or she is going to tune you out because they're not used to those words, right?
Mm-hmm.
So go in there and talk about recruiting as a supply chain, because most executives understand supply chains, whatever their business model is, they do understand what that looks like and how it plays out in their head. So basically be like, this is a supply chain for people. And if there are problems in the supply chain, like there are shitty managers causing turnover, well, if you had a problem in your physical supply chain, you would go fix it. So if you have a problem in this people supply chain, we got to go fix it.
Yep.
So if you use words and concepts they already understand, expedite some of the problems in these areas too.
Right. Yep. And seeing your human resources, as it were, as actual assets to the business.
Yep.
Because I've got news for anybody out there who thinks these humans that are filling your seats are you wouldn't have a company if it weren't for employees. And the better and happier, that's trite, I get that it's played out, but the happier your employees are, the better your company thrives, just in general. But specifically, the more interaction that your employees have with positive experiences from the top side, the more quality employees you're going to have and retain.
100%.
And then you'll be able to say in 5 years, where are you going to be? I'm going to have your job because you're going to be better, and that won't be a question. That's absolutely something that will happen.
Man, I can tell you too, from a job I had once, is about a 250 employee company, and in the first couple of years, I was there maybe a couple of years total. In the first couple of years, when it was smaller, the CEO would be in the elevator with somebody and shoot the shit with them, find out about their life, ask them questions about the business. The fucking turnover in those years was under 10%. And then like he got advice from consultants about like rapidly scaling it or whatever bullshit people like to talk about. And we got up to like 175, 200. He'd be in the elevator and not acknowledge people, just like fucking have his head down, do his own thing. The turnover in those years was like 50 plus. So you're talking about a 40% jack in turnover simply because the person with the most authority clearly doesn't care about you, doesn't even want to make eye contact with you in an elevator. Like, that's going to demoralize you, and eventually you're going to be like, well, I have no role here. I have no path for improvement. And, like, to go back to what we were saying at the exact beginning, you would think in those moments that, like, HR has your back, that not maybe on CEO issues, but you would think, like, oh, there's somebody in HR that I could get up with and talk about these issues or whatever. No. They're always going to have the back of the highest ranking person, you know?
Yep. And they're going to go running and talk all about you.
Yep, for sure.
Whatever mood they're in that day, this is why it needs to be a financially data-driven position.
Yep.
Because human beings report based on their feelings and their perceptions.
Yep.
And if that HR person doesn't like you or perceives you as a threat to the company,
yep,
you've suddenly become person zero. They want you out, and they
Yep.
will do whatever it takes to bully you out.
Yep. And like we can do a separate episode on this. I just created like 4 new episode ideas just by bullshitting on this. But like the whole deal with like a performance improvement plan, I was on one at ESPN for a second. A friend of mine who's a lawyer was put on one by her firm, and it's like literally they're not designed to try to improve you. They're designed to force you out, you know? Like
right.
you could get better on them, and if you check all the right boxes, it's harder for them to get you out. But the whole design of them is to get you out. It's not to improve you.
Right.
So the middle word is usually a lie. And again, that's another problem with HR is like, oh, you put me on an improvement plan, so if I improve, we should be good here. Nope, you still probably will get fired.
Right.
It's like,
because now you're under the microscope. Now it's going to take you picking your nose wrong or at the wrong moment to get kicked out of the group. You know.
And I was at a thing in Chicago last fall at Yellow, which is like a ATS chat recruitment marketing software deal.
Right.
They have a bunch of like investor money, and they have like a sweet ass place that overlooks downtown Chicago. So that part was cool. But like one thing I heard there that stuck with me is like, okay, HR usually owns like employee engagement surveys, employee feedback. Some dude that was speaking there, like from a vendor, was telling me like how many companies, if you give legitimate feedback, all it really is you're basically signing up for the next layoff list.
Yes.
And I was like, yeah, that sucks, man. Like, okay, I work here every day, 8 to 10 hours. I have legitimate ideas about how to make this place better in terms of process. And as soon as I do that, someone somewhere in HR probably just slapped me on a list like, well, next time we got to do layoffs, like, this dude's up. It's like, that sucks, man. That shouldn't be how it works, but unfortunately it is, you know?
We need to create a show around working hours too, because our country is one of the most overworked countries.
Oh yeah.
In terms of man hours put in versus work actually accomplished.
That's ridiculous.
We've already kind of touched on that, but HR, again, being a data-driven department, ideally, would be able to identify that this person should still be paid what they're being paid and be allowed to work there. Okay, so I used to go in and back cleanup for temporary agencies, right? And I got paid ridiculous amounts of money to back cleanup for these temp agencies, but whose employees would go in and screw up something on admin side for whoever, it doesn't matter. And I would do the same job that person was doing, but I would be done in half the time because I get the process. I probably am there to create the process actually. But I would argue I deserve to be paid that same amount. Right. I would argue that I deserve to still be paid the full-time salary, even though I'm doing a part-time job.
Right.
For that purpose. And I don't need to be there, and I'm still performing the job in its entirety. And you don't need me to sit around and stare at my desk for the next 4 or 5 hours for any reason whatsoever.
Right. Yep.
Which only happened once. I only managed to talk somebody into that once, and they doubled my hourly and let me go after 4 or 5 hours each day. But nothing suffered in the company. Not one thing suffered by kicking me away from the desk. And that's another thing that we need to touch on that relates back to this HR department issue.
I'll even cue this up for next time. This always stuck out to me, and I think I wrote this in like 2015. Between 1985 and 2010, the weekly leisure time of college-educated men and women fell by 2.5 hours, more than any other demographic. This is all in North America. The economist Robert Frank once wrote, building wealth to some men and women is a creative process. It might be the closest thing they have to fun, which is like pretty depressing to think about. But I think that's the psychological flip side of what we're talking about with HR. It's like they exist to protect those types of people who view wealth creation as fun. So like they don't have any incentive to like make us work less or create programs so we work less, because the guys that pay their salaries are tell these peons to work more, you know?
Right.
Because
Right.
it
And if you
works
can
for
get it
me.
done faster, then you can get more done. So you can do
Right.
double the work because you've done it so efficiently in the first half of the day, then continue on for the second half of the day just as efficiently.
Right, even though nobody understands like the law of diminishing returns, you know?
Right.
Seemingly.
Again, would be better if we put data scientists in HR department so that they can factor those things in, because these equations, there's math that figures this out. And I bet there are a handful of people that do actually use things like that probably the smartest people in the room, and I'm not talking Enron, I'm talking people like Warren Buffett. He's probably hyper aware of his employee count and how much that costs him.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I would say like some of the best people in terms of that management, organizing their stuff, etc. Like they do know those statistics, even though they're quote unquote HR things, you know?
Right.
They do know them. So that's like, to me, that's the whole thing, is like if you claim to care about your business, you can't care about like just the fucking margins of it. You gotta care about like the human elements, but you don't have to make them soft. You can still turn those human elements into trackable data, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
100%. All right, so we have a bunch of topics for next time then, which is good.
Yep.
And then we'll have a bunch before you embark on your like 32-hour journey in a couple days, which like the next time we start taping this stuff will be actually probably like geographically closer to each other doing these things, you know?
Yep. Because I'll be back in Denver in a week, so we'll be like 8 hours from each other, 12 hours from each other, rather than.
By the time this one airs, it'll be like that.
Yep. By the time this one airs, we'll have recorded the one closer to each other.
Yep, for sure. All right, cool. So, I'll hit you up tomorrow if you have time in between packing or whatever, because I should have time in the afternoon to do another one.
Cool.
And then we'll go from there. All right.
Sounds good.
Cool.
All right.
All right. Bye.
See ya.